Shalom. Welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad House of Delmar, together with my co-host Mark Ronich of Statewide News Service, jbiztechvalley.com, and now columnist for the Jewish Press.
I have a column in there called Albany Beat where I talk about how government relates to the Jewish community, or doesn't as the case may be. And of course, with the Jewish community is always interested in economics. And we have the CEO of the Center for Economic Growth, Mike Hickey. Welcome to the Jewish View.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Rabbi.
Great to have you here.
It's good to be here.
You're relatively new in the position.
I am. Started in July of this past year. Yeah.
And so tell us, how is it getting your feet self-centered and your feet set? Well, and then we'll talk about what it is. And then we'll talk about
what it is.
But let's talk about how you feel the transition has been going.
So certainly I was chairman of the board of CEG before I stepped in as interim president and CEO. And you're pretty far removed as a board member. So when you really get involved in the day-to-day things, it's quite different. And certainly with the Upstate Revitalization Initiative happening at the time I came into the job, you talk about jumping into the fire. Well, the flames were pretty high at that point. So I would like to have it no other way, though. That's the best way to learn, is to be thrown in. Great opportunity to meet a bunch of new people that had a lot of passion for the region, and be able to work together with them was just a fantastic experience.
I'm one of the new people who you met.
Yes, you are. You are, Mark.
So tell us what Center for Economic Growth, what their aim is and what the mission is for...
Yeah, so the Center for Economic Growth was actually founded about 1987, so it's about 28 years old, and it was really formed from the standpoint of the private sector, public sector partnerships, which is proven to be the best model for driving economic development, is when you can get private sector backing up and working with the public sector to drive economic growth. And so back in the early 90s, we started to identify potential industry clusters that are a way for private and public interests to focus on and grow. And so I think through that, it's been the last 28 years, we've seen the growth of some of those technology clusters in our region and really driving a lot of our private sector growth.
But this is just for, I'm just saying, sorry, the Capital District?
No, so over its time, you remember the term Tech Valley? At one point, Tech Valley.
That's my website, jbiztechvalley.com. I had named my website because you...
wasn't me personally, but there's a lot of people.
It was the Chambers of Commerce.
And the Center for Economic Growth was a partner
that branded Tech Valley. So I said, all right, I'll start my website with Tech Valley in it and continue that.
I still think it's a great brand. So I think we would say the capital region is sort of the heart of Tech Valley. But at times, CEG's footprint got as large as Tech Valley, which at some points was up to 21, 22 counties, right? Which was kind of large. Historically, our boundaries have been about 13 counties, which is the current capital region, counties designated by the governor in his regional system. So that's Columbia Green, Schenectady, Rensselaer, Saratoga, Albany, and then Washington and Warren.
And not Schoharie?
That's pretty much what I consider the Capital District.
So some people consider only the major four in the center, but the capital region isn't. So that's how we're defining it now. But we always worked with Fulton, Montgomery, and Schoharie counties.
And then Greene and Columbia, I thought would be...
Columbia and Greene are part of the capital region.
Okay,
but
good.
Fulton, Montgomery, and Schoharie, I think if you'd asked them many times, they felt like they were also part of the capital region. But in that sort of...
part of my region.
That's right.
That's it.
And part of that redistricting, they've sort of fallen into the Mohawk Valley region.
So what's the job to see that there's more industry or more employment in or your area? I keep on calling it the Capital District, but
I think
for the most part it is.
I think in simple terms, when we think about economic development, right, we think about prosperity for all our citizens and how do we grow, how do we sustain growth, and so that's usually about jobs, productivity, GDP growth. Because that spills into a lot of things in our community. It gets into our urban centers, our areas of density, our areas of need as well. And so the whole idea is we actually have a skill. One of the things we have a challenge not only in our region, but in the state and in the nation is this skill gap, right? And so we have a lot of people that may have stopped looking for work because they didn't have the skills to get the jobs. So how do we get them back into the workforce? How do we bring companies here? How do we bring jobs here? Actually, 80% of economic growth is actually usually driven by companies that are already here. So how do we help the companies that are here become more successful and grow and add jobs?
Yeah. So why is it that You haven't focused on making this sort of a media technology. You know, when you said you looked at different tech centers, so companies and ideas, I don't see any growth for media in this region. I see everything is.
What would be media? Movies? I mean, what do you mean by media?
It's not. Well, it could be movies, but it's also television and getting major corporations to settle here, Sinclair Broadcasting or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just thinking, why is this not a hub for the broadcast industry?
So, one of the things we look at is, do we have the right to sort of claim something as our own, right? Do we have the right to grow an industry, to attract an industry? Do we have the brand? So do we have the assets on the ground, the skill sets, the people, right? And so as we looked at and sort of looked at all the technology plays and so forth, I just don't think that we showed that we had the ability to do it. And then also we would look at growth potential in those markets, right? So how many jobs could we potentially bring in? Because it always is about focus, and you have to pick and choose, right? You can't do everything. Mm-hmm. And so when we did all that and put all that data in and looked at the evidence and it boiled down, from a tech side, two things really emerged from technology perspective. One was clean tech, and one was certainly this whole idea of the issue of health and population health tech cluster.
I see. Well, I'd like to have a private conversation with you about getting media and how many jobs could be had if you really focused on making this a media cluster with the radius that we have here between New York City, Boston, and Philadelphia and the Poconos and the areas in a 3-hour driving radius.
So one of the opportunities for that, Mark, could be is we do have some focus on something called the creative economy here, which we have 30,000 people employed in the capital region in what we call the creative economy.
What's the creative economy? What is it?
Yeah, so it's sort of been defined. It could be anything from somebody who's an artist or photographer all the way up to some people that are developing video games, developers that are developing video games. It could be people that are producing and making films and stuff like that. It could be marketing professionals of the creative nature. So it was a stream of passion that we have in the area, right? And so one of our strategies in our liftoff strategy actually addresses an initiative around this creative economy and helping those businesses grow. So that's possibly a home for your passion, Mark.
You mentioned the Upstate Revitalization Initiative.
Yes.
Tell us about that and what your plan was that you submitted, what that plan was about.
Sure. So the governor announced back in the spring the idea of looking at 7 upstate regions. So there's 10 regions as part of his economic development competition on an annual basis. If you take out Long Island, New York City, and Buffalo, which had won the Buffalo Billion Project a couple years ago, there were 7 remaining upstate regions. And so the governor is focusing. He understands some of the challenges that we all have in the upstate. Some are worse off than others as far as the creation of jobs, what's happening in our urban centers, and poverty and job growth and population growth and so forth. And so I think he's made it a real focus. And so there's $1.5 billion available.
Divided equally in 7 counties?
No. So that's one thing he's also fond of is competitions. So it's a competition, so it kind of raises the bar for everybody. I know personally, our region, this was a real catalyst for us to really come together, collaborate, and actually build a strategy, I think, for the first time that's very cohesive and impacts most of the region. And our community came together to do it, right? It wasn't a few people in a room doing it. It was a pretty broad base. We counted over 6,000 personal engagements as part of building this strategy. So the idea is there will be 3 winners and 4 losers. In competition, 3 regions will get $500 million each. That's how it was. $500 million each. But I think one of the things that you'll see is, and I'm guessing, I do not know this.
You had to make a whole proposal? I mean,
you did. And it had to be so it wasn't supposed to be a list of projects, right? It had to be a strategy, and it had to be transformational. It really had to lift a region. And we believe, we're able to check that box. We believe we did a pretty good job of creating an integrated, holistic strategy that all builds off. And when you actually implement them together, they're going to collectively achieve more than if you tried to launch one of those.
So what's the strategy?
So there's 5 strategy components,
okay.
Right? So one is our next tech around, which is both of our initiatives around clean tech and our population health tech cluster. We also have our lift-off strategy, which is really taking a look at who we are as a region. And I can go through these in more detail. It's up to you. I'll give you the quick one right now. And looking at the personalities of what we had. And we have 3 initiatives in that area that look to attack how we can leverage and grow our entrepreneurship and innovation ecosystem. We have our talent strategy, which is really about utilizing our educational footprints we have in our region, but really addressing that skill gap that there is, that private sector needs, and where the jobs are going, and how the gap is between the higher education institutions are actually are not providing the right talent at this point for the private sector, which is the #1 inhibitor to their growth. And then the third thing is we're always going to have problems with this if we don't start investing in our youth, investing in tomorrow. So
That's true.
what are some programs that we can do with STEM in the K through 12? And we also know that it's children that aren't reading at the 3rd grade level by 3rd grade have a hard time succeeding in life, right? And so how do we make sure that our kids are reading appropriately at the 3rd grade level?
The Daily News and the New York Post write on a 3rd grade level. The New York Times is on a 5th grade reading level. So when you get the newspapers that everyone's reading, and they're reading at the lower levels and not a higher level, I mean, what do you expect, know? And right. Even when I went to college, and it's still the case today, I mean, the professors at the universities are saying, well, why are they graduating from high school? What type of students are they? They don't know their grammar, they don't know how to talk, they don't know how to reason, they don't know, what's going on in high school. It sort of seemed like it's just a pass-through.
Yeah.
And then when they get to college, these college professors are like intolerant of trying to teach the kids to the next level that they should have been taught in junior high and high school. So I hope that works. Now, when you say STEM, should it be called STEAM and have the arts added, not just science, technology?
So I've heard that debate. I think the arts is really important to a community, and that's one of the things that's addressed in our creative economy. And as we start looking, our other 2 strategies are our metro strategy. So how do we rebuild our downtowns and make them exciting places for millennials to come and live? And our gateway strategy, which actually says our geographical presence has really been an asset for our region for hundreds of years, going back to all the fur trading days, right? Our river is the farthernmost 12-month port that there is, and there's a lot of opportunity to do things with distribution and having more barges come up the river and staying off the roads. So, but back to your question, right, which was
should it be STEAM and have the arts?
It's going to be STEAM. So the arts, I think the focus in the skill, the problem is the skills in those tech jobs is just so strong, and it's so needed, and it's such a gap. And so part of the reason is a lot of those are even middle skill jobs, which has really frankly driven this economy, the US economy, for so long. But what's changed over the last 50 years is the requirements for those jobs have changed. Mm-hmm. There's so much automation. So right now, if someone's good at science and math, right, you go on to get a 4-year degree, perhaps an engineering degree. But we need a lot of people who don't need those full 4-year degrees, but they need to have some competency around math and science to operate machinery in some of these factories that we have now. And that seems to be the real gap, is just having that technical, or it might be in the medical industry, right? The people that can go into working with equipment and stuff in the medical industry.
Right, but when you talk about the arts, I mean, science is tied in with the arts, technology is tied in with the arts, math is tied in with the arts. You have to know how to do all of that, so it seems like it's a natural fit for the arts to be there. If you look at it from the other way, not, does STEM, does the arts relate to STEM, not STEM relating to the arts?
So the question I would ask you is there an identifiable skill gap in the arts field, like there is in the engineering and math and science fields?
Right. Of course there is. And you haven't identified it yet, have you?
Well,
you haven't spoken to the right people.
Maybe that's what it is. I haven't come across it. Again, not that I don't think the arts is important, and we do have some initiatives that address the arts in our strategy.
That's good. Okay. All right. I'm really into the arts, as you can tell.
I can tell that.
Okay.
So the basics again, though. Are you a government agency, or how are you funded?
Yeah, so we are a 501c3 nonprofit that is funded by private sector members. So and now we also depend on grants and stuff like that. So we have part of our operation that helps manufacturers and other businesses grow, help them to do lean training and so forth. So we rely on some things from NISTAR, ESD, some other grants and stuff like that. So, but between our primary funding comes from our private sector members and from grant funding.
So that increases their budget line. I mean, did you have to get agreements for these private sector companies ahead of time in order to know that you could, make it and not struggle as a nonprofit?
Yeah, so I don't know what it was like in the early days when they started it in 1987, but just the longevity of the organization, right, being around 28 years, I think says something about what the private sector thinks about economic development, and that they're willing to play a role in it and willing to invest in it.
What's your budget?
Our budget is pretty small. It's probably around $1.8 million a year.
Okay. All right, I'll take 10%. It's pretty small. That's a pretty good, a lot of not-for-profits who would love to have a budget like that.
Yeah.
So are you at a break, at the end of the year, are you at a break even?
Yeah, we're usually, go back and forth. If you look historically over the last 5 years, you make a little, you lose a little, you make a little, you lose a little.
All right.
So.
Now, let me ask you about, you said you came from the board side. You were president of the board before you became...
Chairman of the board, yes.
You were chairman of the board before you became CEO of the company. Does it give you more of a sensitivity of how much more in tune you need to have the board play a role? Or, you said you were pretty far removed as a board member. And as chairman of the board, that says a lot. I mean, so I was just thinking...
I think it's typical board role. Right? Board is supposed to be there for strategic direction, to help sort of mentor the leadership in an organization and so forth. If a board has to get involved in day-to-day tactical operational stuff, right, something's wrong. So, and that's sort of what I meant by that comment. So as a board member, you're meeting 4 times a year. You're talking about visionary, strategic stuff. Sort of the big rocks, not the small rocks. When you start getting into all the little moving parts and how you have to try to meet payroll and when the grant money's coming in and how a certain investor may feel about the strategy you have versus how somebody else may feel about it. Right?
And what I'm going to ask you is typical of a not-for-profit, but do your board members go out and try to recruit new businesses and in essence fundraise?
Yeah, so that's a really great question and a great point. I think our board hasn't been engaged in that previously. But we've had some conversations, and I have some new board members that are coming on that really believe in that. They believe it's their responsibility when they're traveling in business and there are other parts of the country, right? What's our game plan? Is there somebody they can go talk to when they're there, right? And how to use the people that are here to leverage maybe supply chain players and so forth to come to the area. So I think that's something we have to do a better job of, and I think it's a pretty neat, unique strategy.
Okay, good. So that's coming up in the future. So now you came from Siena College.
I was previously was the chief operating officer at MapInfo, and then I became the president of MapInfo and Pitney Bowes upon the purchase.
I like MapInfo.
Well, good. That's good. I'm glad you did. And so I was, I spent 12 years at the MapInfo and then another 3 running Pitney Bowes global software businesses, and then I went to Siena. I started their Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship there.
Okay, so how has that grown, and what did you?
That's grown great. It was tough to walk away from. Loved the students, loved the staff. It was a great environment. We actually started to add educational curriculum, so it became a minor last year, and we became one of the fastest growing minors on campus. So
I took a continuing ed course, emerging management.
I'm not familiar with that.
That was given at the Siena campus, and it was it was really great. It was really
well. There's a lot of good courses you can get on the Siena campus.
That's right. So, so what do you see as with this upstate revitalization initiative? When you say that there's going to be out of 7, there's going to be 3 winners for non-winners,
Right.
not yet winners.
But Mark, do you think that's a good system, though?
Well,
just
I'm,
thinking-
you know,
I mean, it's not up to you.
obviously
but I'm
the
just saying
governor
as a
thinks it's a
reporter.
good
I
system.
mean, maybe that's why I said initially, you have money, divide it up equally. I feel bad for the 4 regions that get nothing, and
Yeah.
some regions are very poor.
So I think, Rabbi, there's a thought process behind that. Some people don't like the competitions. I tell you what's good about the competitions. It really does raise the bar. I think it's like sort of all ships rise with the tide, so to speak. I know our region is so much better off from having that catalyst to go do this. I got to imagine the other 6 regions are too. And so, like what we like to say is, if we're going to lose this, we won because we have a plan. And now we might not be able to have the same funding to execute it. But I also think the governor probably will get pretty creative about how even the 4 people who don't win this actually can walk away as winners. And so one example he's already said is those that win the URI will be only eligible for a little bit of the normal CFA process that happens every year, and those that lose the URI will be eligible for $90 million in the CFA funding, right? So that's already helps make those people feel pretty good about not winning the URI competition. And I also think it's about, you heard him say, New York's open for business, right? And he's trying to change the direction the state's been heading for a long time.
Do you feel New York is open for business?
I believe there's a lot of initiatives out there that are really trying to make it happen. You're changing years and years and years, and there's no such thing as a perfect system,
Okay.
right? But the intent is there, and certainly the focus on helping upstate is there.
There's been a lot of criticism about how few jobs and how this has been lacking and hasn't really taken off
Yeah.
the way everyone had thought it would. But like you said,
There's always critics,
good tolerant.
right?
Yeah, right.
There's always critics.
The unemployment rate is very low.
It's very 5%.
The unemployment, and we are creating private sector jobs in this region from the investments that the state has made previously in semiconductor and nanotechnology. When you look at global foundries, they only promised 1,000 or so jobs, and they're almost up to 3,500 now.
And when I was in college, 5% unemployment was full employment. It was
Yeah.
considered full employment. Now I don't know if that's the case today, but that was the bellwether of my economics class. So
And I think when you measure the, economic development, it's hard to measure it on a month-to-month or a year-to-year basis,
Sure.
right? It's almost like a decade as your measuring stick, right? Because it takes time. You got to get the companies here, you got to have the investments in the capital, you got to hire the staff, right? You got to start having those things in the marketplace, then somebody else has to follow, rest of the supply chain and the cluster building out. So it does take time. But the model is proven to work in other parts. I mean, when you look at best practices economic development, it's a cluster-based private-public partnership approach that seems to work.
now, aside from having the strategic ideology in place, do you also in your plan have a specific, project-oriented part of the plan, like, the downtown Albany area, there'll be a transportation hub, or there'll be another convention, some sort of conference center, or do you, in Saratoga, they're going to build this, and do you also have a project list?
In some cases we do. In some cases it's a framework to start plugging some stuff in. So an example of that would be our metro strategy. And one of the things that was one of the criteria is to try to line up other private sector investors, because there's a 5-to-1 match requirement in this as well.
Okay.
And so one of our projects we had in our metro strategy, there was developers that are interested in some projects in downtown Albany, some other developers interested in some projects in Glens Falls, and so we were able to get some specificity in the time that the plan went in to put some things around that, right?
So what's happening for downtown Albany?
Well, so there's a couple sites that are looking at it. So there's certainly the old convention center site, the warehouse district, the Tobin's First Prize facility, are all sort of areas that are looked at.
What
from
would
a
happen
perspective.
in those areas?
So all of these, what we're trying to do, so remember, one of the things we're trying to do, our outcomes we're looking for is creating 40,000 new jobs, attracting 10,000 people to our region that aren't here now, taking 4,500 people who stop looking for a job, get them trained, and get them back into the workforce, and taking 20,000 people out of our poverty level, which is a 15% reduction in our poverty. So those are some of our targets that we're looking to do. And so those 10,000 people we're trying to attract, a lot of them are going to probably be millennials, right? They're going to be here, raise family, build homes. And one thing you notice about millennials is they're really attracted to urban living now, right? That's sort of come around. It's not suburban living anymore.
Yeah, it happened really more in New York and even, I know, in Chicago, but really didn't take off in Albany.
It hasn't. So that's part of what our strategies and our metro strategies. How do we create downtowns that are going to be very attractive to those people? So the method is very up-to-date, state-of-the-art urban planning concepts that revolve around how do you combine, retail, commercial, and residential properties together. And certainly we have a lot of our cities are located near riverfronts, so how do we maximize our riverfront stuff as we can? And so those will become priority projects around that way as we start creating downtowns that people want to come, that holds adage of live, work, and play, right? You don't want to have to get in your car and do things. You want to be able to walk around and do things. And we've already seen some sort of things coming to life in our cities, even around here. Certainly what's happening over in Troy, what's happening in Schenectady. We've all know what the rebirth of Saratoga back in the 70s and how people love those downtowns, right? So those are the type of things we need to recreate.
What was the Glens Falls piece that you were mentioning?
Well, there's some developers that are actually looking at some downtown properties and the development, the same type concept, the combining the retail, commercial, and residential space in walking spots in downtown.
But don't they need the population, or they build it and they will come, or?
Well, so these obviously will happen in areas of density because that's what's going to attract the dollars, right? But there's a developer that believes in that part of that downtown, and there's a lot of activity starting to happen in Glens Falls too. Glens Falls is sort of the gateway to the North Country, right, so to speak. So.
Exactly. I was gonna. Well, I think I have always thought that if you look at 787, you look at the waterfront, and you compare it to the FDR Drive in Manhattan, that you look at the way the FDR Drive, how the buildings, and whether it's Rockefeller University or it's the hospitals or it's apartment complexes that have extended over the highway, that you can get over that hump of having the railway and the highway and everything else blocking that, you can build up Broadway and have buildings that hover over the highway. So you have a vista of City of Rensselaer or City of Troy, but it's not quite, look, the people in Manhattan have a vista of Rikers Island. I mean, it's not like, but still, people like to build, to live near the water and to have a view of the water. And I just thought that, maybe we're missing an opportunity with thinking that way. The other thing is, you used to be located Ecom Square, right?
CEG?
CEG.
No,
yeah.
we used to be on State Street.
Okay, but you're on State Street now.
No, we're on North Pearl Street.
Now you're on North Pearl Street. Okay, we've got to connect the dots. Well, then maybe it was Mike Tucker who owned the property for Ecom Square.
He might have. Yeah.
Okay, because that whole thing just closed up. The city bought it or whatever, and then it's all boarded up now. I mean, at least it had some businesses there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's got to be part of your plan to.
It is. So we have, as part of our metro strategy, there's an urban loan fund. So the idea is how do we get entrepreneurs to get in some of our areas of blight in some of our neighborhoods that really need help and actually start businesses and grow businesses and get jobs in there.
I just thought that was such a shame that they had those businesses move out. I know Mike Tucker had Mercer companies, and they had all those businesses move out, and they were thinking, with the plan that it would be used, that property would be used, and there was vitality there, there was life there. There were people who worked in Ecom Square that went to the bars and the restaurants across from SUNY.
Yep.
And
that's all the concept, right? So, and I think it's. When you look at all examples of where towns and cities have rebuilt themselves, right, it always comes from the people that live there, that want it to be something better and willing to work together and do those things. So we've got a strategy that's going to have access to funding, and so those communities that really want to help change their urban centers, I think, are going to have a place to help get that done, both from an expertise and a planning perspective, but also from a funding perspective.
Now, we have an aquarium going in Rotterdam Square Mall, I believe. Is there an aquarium part of your plan for this?
So there's not one in this plan, but I know of some people who I highly respect who think one should be going in the Albany or Rensselaer area.
I do too.
Right, and there's a couple of those plans that have been out there and people look at. So I think those are always things that can happen. Like those are projects, right?
Those are projects
that can happen underneath the initiatives down the line. And I think that's. So say if we win, I think as people understand the context of the strategy and the initiatives, they'll start coming up with even better and newer ideas and projects that fit those things.
I always said, you got the Utica Zoo and Syracuse Zoo, you know, we have our own zoo. It's the state capitol, but you
yeah.
don't have to have another zoo. But anyhow, that's my joke for the end of the show.
Those are different animals.
That's a different animals, yes, political animals, yes.
So one thing I did want to mention,
Yes, sure.
if we could, you know, when we look, some people when they compare us to other upstate regions say, hey, Albany's doing a lot better than the upstate region, so Albany doesn't need this money. And I think our argument for that is a couple things. Number one is that we have grown our private sector jobs based on the money that we've gotten from the state, but at the same time, we've lost a lot of public sector jobs, right? Well, it used to be about 26% of our employment is now approaching 21%. But our biggest concern really is our population growth. It's only 0.15%, which is rather flat. State of New York is 0.4. Nationally, it's 0.8, but the more alarming thing is our largest growing sector is 65 and over. So those people are not going to be creating and spending time in jobs, and lots of times their discretionary income gets spent in other parts of the country, right, or world, right, or they're in Florida. And so if you plug those trends into the economic engine, we'll be out of 20,000 jobs over the next 10 years. And I don't think the state of New York can afford to let the capital region represent that, you know, a decrease in jobs.
Sure. Okay. Very
Right,
good.
Mike,
Thank you.
you're doing great work. You know, time flew. You really informed us about what's happening in the Capital District and economics. So again, your job really benefits everybody in the area. So a lot of success and continue with good health.
Yes,
Thank you,
best of
Rabbi.
success.
Thank
yes.
you, Mark.